going through the Constitution line by line. Now we're in the amendments. I'm Don Frazier.
Paul Fabrizio here, political science professor.
And I teach history. And we are now still in the First Amendment. We got church handled, religion handled.
Wait, no, we haven't got church handled. Or
well, we at least
handled.
got it discussed. But
what we got was the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment.
Perfect.
Okay, and remember, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion.
Correct.
That was the first part.
So what's the next part?
Second part, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
Oh, that's right. We didn't. Yeah.
The free exercise clause. So, Don, if you believe that your religion requires human sacrifice, should you be allowed to sacrifice someone?
You know, it's very interesting because this has come up in my classes before. Mm-hmm. And my students are very charismatic about this.
Whoa.
It just depends on where they're coming from. So I will give you an anecdote.
Okay.
So kid comes up and says, oh, no, I'm from the People's Republic of Austin. Mm-hmm. And we're very open-minded and about this sort of thing. So I said, great. Tell me what that means. He said, well, I think that all cultures are valid, any culture. Mm-hmm. So I said, all right, so Aztec culture, Mayan culture. And this girl looks at me and says, well, all those sacrificial victims were volunteers. And they willingly went up to the platform to have their beating hearts ripped out of their chest, cut out by flint knives, because they wanted their God to continue his ride through the heavens. I said, so you know they're volunteers? Oh, yes. I learned this in high school down in Austin. I said, okay, so what about Nazi culture? Well, Nazis are a little, so she starts equivocating now. And I said, well, what about things like female genital mutilation? Mm-hmm. Foursquare against that. But I thought you said all cultures were valid. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, what if your religion requires human sacrifice?
Yeah. And this,
or multiple wives.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second.
Because that came up.
Yeah, and that actually went to the Supreme Court. And the first time the Supreme Court actually dealt with this case was with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what we call the Mormon Church. And they wanted to become a state. Utah. And so they petitioned, went through the process, outlined in the Constitution to become a state, and they were turned down because they believed in polygamy. And they were told, sorry. So the question is, do you keep your faith or not? So they appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, sorry, if you want to be a state, you have to change your religious belief. That's basically the effect of the decision. So the state interfered in
the free practice of religion.
Yeah, exactly. In the very first case that it took up. And this was, I believe, in after
1850s.
So anyway, that's where the first time the court dealt with it, and it went against religion and said there's a limit to what you can practice. So it's generally accepted now that if you want to kill someone, have human sacrifice in your church, government's going to restrict that. Okay?
Based on precedent now? Because it's not in the Constitution.
Based on precedent, based on government interference. The simple way to look at it is that the government doesn't care about your belief, but the government does care about your practice. So, if you're going to do things in the practice of your faith, the government retains the right to interfere. You can believe whatever you want, but how you actually carry
how that
out,
manifests itself,
government's going to be involved.
If there's sharp knives involved, they're probably going to be against it.
Possibly, but again, and here's the confusing thing.
Yeah, because I forgot about circumcision.
I wasn't even talking about that.
Well, I said sharp knives. So.
I was thinking of animal sacrifice, and we'll get to that.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Okay. The first part of the Constitution, the Establishment Clause, I talked about the lemon test.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was finally, the Supreme Court came up with, here's guidelines.
So is there a citrus test for this?
There is no citrus test. There's no any kind of test for this at all. It's decided by the court on a case-by-case basis. So therefore, we really aren't sure what is appropriate and what is not. Can you use drugs if
Yeah.
your religion calls for that?
Peyote.
Yeah. Famous cases before the court. Can you use animal sacrifice? These are the kind of things. What if your religion says no medicine is allowed?
Oh, that's a big one. It's
Okay.
been in the headlines.
It has. And so these are the kind of things where the court basically decides things on a case-by-case basis. So let's take the animal sacrifice. Santeria is a faith.
Oh, that's chickens.
Yeah, it's chickens. Santeria is a faith, and I characterize it. It's really found in the Caribbean, but you can see it. I encountered it when I lived in Baltimore.
I bet.
It's also found in Florida, and there was a county there where the health department was really disturbed because the Santerians were sacrificing chickens as part of their religious service and then just discarding the chickens. And they said, no, if you're going to use animals in your sacrifice, you've got to dispose of it. You've got to handle it in a prescribed way. And the Santerians said, no, that's not the way it's done in our faith. And, well, the health department came and said, you can't do that. And the Santerians said, we're going to take this case to the Supreme Court. And they did. And the Supreme Court said, hey, guess what? We're deciding things on the Santerian side.
Really?
Yeah.
So stinky chicken carcasses are in.
You better believe it. So go ahead and do that as you want to. And then you think, okay, that's a victory for religion there. Okay? And you can do what you want. But then you think about the peyote case.
Mm-hmm.
2 guys in Oregon working for the state of Oregon. They're Native Americans who participate in Native American religion.
So the Native American church.
Yes, and they required the use of peyote.
Sure.
So they're filling out proper government forms, etc. And, for their job, do you use illegal drugs? And they said, yeah, we use peyote as part of our religious service. They lose their job.
Wow.
And they go, wait a second. We have the right under the Constitution, free exercise, to exercise our faith as we see fit. So it requires us to use drugs. And they said, sorry, you can't. So they sued and they went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided on the side of the state of Oregon.
Really?
And said, you guys don't need to have jobs with the government. You can have your jobs anyplace.
You can go work at 7-Eleven.
Yeah, I think they were working for the Department of Transportation for the state of Oregon, but I'm not positive about that. And so you guys can go get your job someplace else. So if Oregon takes the position that drug-free is the way to go, sorry, you have to abide by it.
Yeah,
doesn't matter what your faith is.
Just closes some of those jobs to you, but it doesn't mean you can't work someplace else.
Yeah. So there you go. Now, here's another case. What about snake handlers?
Ooh, snake handlers. My favorite.
Have you encountered them before?
I have not. I've never actually seen the ceremony. I've seen the church and the worship going on.
Yes.
As I drove by Appalachia.
Okay.
It was near Sand Mountain, Alabama.
Okay.
So,
and for those who don't know, we're talking about churches where your faith in God is so powerful that you can handle, according to text from the Scripture,
from
the Bible,
the Gospel of Mark, if I'm not mistaken.
you can handle snakes, poison snakes, and you can also drink poison.
Yeah, and it will not harm you.
And it will not harm you. And if it does, your faith was not strong enough.
Wow.
And so what happens is that you go to these services, apparently. I've never been to one, but you go to it, and there's snakes crawling around, rattlesnakes, whatever, and there's bottles of strychnine or whatever there, and you can drink them if you feel so called. And before I came to McMurray University in South Georgia, where my wife and I lived, there was one of these churches. And one day, somebody died.
Huh. Guess their faith wasn't strong enough.
Okay, their faith wasn't strong enough. So the sheriff of the county went down to investigate the death and saw the snakes all wreathing around and saw the bottles of poison, and was particularly taken aback by the young children who were there in the presence of the snakes and with the poison.
Yeah, because their faith is not fully developed.
And so the question was asked of the sheriff, are you going to arrest them on the basis of endangering children?
Well, David Koresh.
You think about that. But let me just get back to
Yeah,
this.
I'll let you do your snake handling.
And so what the sheriff said is, I'm not going to touch this. This is free exercise of religion. They have every right to do what they're going to do. I'm not going to get involved.
Such a Georgia attitude.
Yeah.
Live and let live.
Live and let live, or live and let die.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened there.
But
So,
David Koresh
bring up David Koresh.
was
of course,
arguing
the Waco.
Yeah, the whole Waco incident.
This is 1995, I guess.
Earlier than that, but it was when I was at TCU.
Okay.
I remember that pretty well. So early 90s,
Okay.
or maybe late 80s. No.
Early 90s.
Yeah, because it was Clinton's
Yeah,
administration.
Bill Clinton was president.
All right, so they have a bunch of underage children that are being married off.
Oh, boy.
And so all of a sudden that really looks a whole lot like some sort of child abuse is going on there. So then agents come out. Well, first Texas Rangers came out, said, dude, what you're doing is creepy. Now, you can do your religion all you want, but we're telling you that this aspect of your religion is going to bring you a lot of unhappy attention.
Right. So go back to the concept.
Yeah.
Believe what you want, but the government is going to be involved in how you practice it.
And so the Texas Rangers were trying to talk them into a solution. But when the feds caught wind of it, they came in and said, no, you guys are moving way too slow. What this really needs is a tank and some tear gas and some automatic weapons. And
that started. When
that
they
started
did
the
started
siege.
The fire.
Yeah.
Eventually, there was a siege that went on for 80 days.
Yeah,
or
it was a
something.
long siege, and then finally the compound burns and everybody inside is dead, and with
Yeah.
a few exceptions.
Just a horrendous.
It was
thing.
just a huge massacre, and it's become a case that people said, well, that's clearly federal overreach. And others say, no, it was actually the federal government doing what it should, which is protect
children.
protect those that cannot protect themselves. And so there's another example of a particular exercise of religion that ran afoul of federal jurisdiction, federal beliefs, and how it should be practiced.
Right. And, there's other things that the government restricts. I mean, your religion could require a belief in polygamy.
Correct.
But government law, state law, prohibits that. You can't do it. And so, there's these communities here in the United States.
Until it gets tested in the Supreme Court.
And this is the question. This was brought up by Justice Antonin Scalia. When you legalized, more correctly, when you incorporated into the Constitution the idea that same-sex marriage is okay, what else then is going to follow that?
Correct.
And actually, he brought it up first with, if you will, the legalization of same-sex relationships. That was the beginning of that. If you allow that, then his argument was then you're going to be allowing same-sex marriage, then you're going to be allowing relationships with animals as well as polygamy, etc.
Or adults and children.
Yeah, all of that. Man-boy societies, whatever you want to say.
Exactly.
So where do you want to go? And if you do it in the context of religion, which many of these have done in the past,
correct,
then is it covered under the free exercise clause? And what we're doing is, without a test, like a lemon test, we really don't have any guidance on this. And it comes down to, and I mean, there's no other way to say this, but why do we have laws on this? It often comes down to disgust on the part of the American public.
Correct.
Or on the part of politicians, the lawmakers.
There goes the temple prostitutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we think prostitution is a terrible thing.
Right. So why do we do certain things? Why do we allow certain things? And why don't we? And under the guise of religion, it
gets pretty dicey in a hurry, doesn't it?
It sure does. And I realize what we're doing is we're talking about just a few instances. The reality is most of us don't encounter any things like this.
Sure.
It's really not
mainstream.
A big deal. Yeah, it's not mainstream. But in fact, often in terms of constitutional law, our laws and the extent, the boundaries of the privileges that we enjoy are set by some really horrible things. Mm-hmm. And we'll get into that when we talk about freedom of speech later on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But, there's other cases that have come up regarding, if I just want to pray over my child, even though my child is sick, can the government come and take that child and give it medical care?
Yeah.
Don't I have the right to determine that medical care for myself? And if it's just going to be prayer, and I believe in the power of prayer, isn't that my free exercise faith?
Yeah, it may not be that kid's free exercise.
Yeah,
though.
exactly. And in the end, the court is really coming down on that side. And they're saying, okay, if the child is old enough to make their own decision, then we'll let it make its own decision. Sure. But if they're too young, then the state has an interest in that child's life.
Extend into vaccinations and who knows where.
Oh, yeah, that's the hot area now is vaccinations. So what do you believe? How can you practice what you believe? And the government can be involved, but we don't know where that line is.
Yeah, because it's moving.
It's moving.
And
there's not a pattern, unfortunately, that we can say, here is the line. So.
Interesting.
Okay. By the way, have we ever defined what religion is?
No.
No, we never have.
What is it?
Do we have an answer for that?
It's a little vague, isn't it?
It sure is. What makes a religion a religion?
Mm-hmm.
Does it require a belief in a being larger than yourself, bigger than yourself? What does it mean to be bigger than yourself?
Does it have to be even supernatural?
Is there rituals? Does that make religion?
Does it have to have rituals?
Yeah. Okay.
Some people think that, belief in the iPhone and all products Apple is a religion.
Mm-hmm.
May very well be.
Maybe. I mean, you hear things about people saying, oh, that's a cult. Well, is a cult a religion?
Yeah, one person's cult's another person's, expression of faith.
Yeah.
David Koresh, good example.
Yeah, as an example.
Or, Heaven's Gate or Jonestown
or any of the others.
Yeah, just pick one.
Yeah.
The Corning community. The Shakers.
So the framers, I don't think, anticipated this. They had to deal with the diversity of religious faith, but there were boundaries about it.
Because frankly, religion and all that's bound up in that is one of the most sensitive and bizarre parts of the human story.
Yes.
And nuanced.
So how do you give it freedom, but how do you protect people at the same time?
Yeah,
and that's the government's dilemma.
Yeah.
And we really are struggling with this thing. And we always will. This is not going to go away.
It will not.
As long as we have this first part of the First Amendment, it's going to just be there.
Well, and what strikes me is that all of this was established to promote liberty. We don't want to have a state religion because we want you guys to be free to do whatever you want.
Right.
But my goodness, liberty is sloppy.
And one other thing, liberty is messy.
Yeah, sloppy and messy and
and ill-defined. And what do we do about crazy people?
Yeah.
However you define crazy.
Yeah.
And, it's not easy. It's really, really difficult. So.
All right, have we beat this one?
We have.
To death?
Yes, we have.
All right, so we beat this clause of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So we've already handled.
We've handled religion.
We've handled religion.
2 clauses regarding religion and freedom of religion. Next is speech.
Oh man, you better pack a lunch. All right, so we'll take that up next time. We may be wearing different shirts then. All right, thanks for watching.